The topic that I was asked to speak on is really in terms of strengthening disaster management capacity of women. And I will certainly do that in context of Dominica, in context of some of the programs that we are involved in. And I will probably focus on the last few years because as you're aware, Dominica, we have experienced two major storms, one in 2015 and one in 2017, and both contributed significantly to the demise of the agricultural sector, as well as impacted in a significant way on the rural dwellers, especially the vulnerable groups which women falls within. And to just give a sort of a sense as to the extent to the damage, in 2015, we recorded a US $47 million loss in agriculture. And likewise, in 2017, which is just 2 years after, we further experienced a significant loss in excess of 50 million in US dollars in agriculture. And this has serious implications to the livelihood and food security among the vulnerable groups. And over the last 10 years or so, we recognize a decline in the contribution of agriculture to GDP, as well as a decline in the export of our crops. And therefore, we know that a large percentage of our rural population depends on agriculture, and agriculture still continues to be a very important sector in the economy of Dominica. It's really important that we pay particular attention in terms of the subject area. We make mention of the issue of disaster management. Now, I think it would be wise first to establish some critical challenges faced by our women, and I will just list some of them because they're important in terms of our discussion and interventions. There's a differential vulnerabilities and risk for women and men in the agri sector due to disproportionate impacts experienced by women. Men and women unequal participation in agriculture is linked to gender-based access to land, credit, extension service, and other productive assets, and gender occupational segregation and differential wages. Men generally own large parcels of land and are involved in large-scale agricultural production and rearing of small stocks. Limited access to financing also undermines rural farmers, and in particular women farmers and agricultural workers, from being able to expand in new markets and move beyond the bound of the working poor. We have seen a disconnect between the scale of farming and accessible financial provisions, and as well as small farmers, particularly those in remote areas, are unable to integrate national value chain and develop sustainable markets for their produce. And last but not least, the limited integration of gender equality analysis, climate and disaster risk resilience in agricultural practices. And that has immense impact in terms of food security, especially in the wake of natural hazards and the impact of climate change. ECA over the years has contributed significantly in helping restoration activities, especially after storms, working with some of the vulnerable groups, women, and in most cases is to get women or producers get back on their feet in terms of production or their agribusiness. And over the last couple of years, we have found different approaches, because right now we cannot continue the business as usual, because if every time after a storm, there's an expectation that you go in there and restore, seeking funding to help people to restore, that in itself is very limited as to its impact in terms of sustainability. And as such, over the last couple of years, there are a number of interventions that I would like to highlight that we think would be more profound in terms of sustainability, that will support the issue of response, the issue of, in a sense, reduced vulnerabilities, and quick response. I think the first area I would like to touch on, because the government itself has made some bold statements. They have gone on to establish some clear policy directions, and that being Dominica being one of the first resilient country, and as such, most of these sectors are following suit and are developing the policy strategic framework. In doing so, in agriculture, we have the Climate Recovery Resilience Program or strategy, as well as the NRDS, which is the National Resilience Recovery Plan. And ICA in itself has supported Dominica in developing what we consider to be an agricultural policy. And the formulation of that policy would take into consideration the critical groups. And I would just like to outline the policy goal, what is articulated in the policy as a goal, and is to promote a sustainable and resilient agriculture and food system that supports conservation and sustainable use of natural resource, preservation of biodiversity and ecosystems, while ensuring food and nutrition security, wealth creation, employment, and diversified livelihoods and rural development. That is in a sense provide the umbrella under which we'll be operating in terms of our programs. And ICA was happy to be part of the leading organization in crafting the policy. And I know at some stage this policy will be approved and be the agricultural policy used in this country. Now, what I think is important to note within the policy framework is the guiding principles that again links a lot in terms of the focus on the vulnerable groups. And I'll just outline them because it fit within the landscape in terms of what we will be speaking on. And I want to make mention of 4 principles or guiding principles. One dealing with the resilience and sustainability in the agricultural system and the supply chain as an integral part of the national food system, with a focus on resource use efficiency, application of technology and innovation, small production systems, and practices and exposure to risk reduction. The whole issue of agro-entrepreneurship and value creation as an integral part of the national food system through support to foster the facilitate innovation and resilient agribusinesses. And the issue of inclusion of gender equity and co-management to ensure participation of key stakeholder groups, including women and youth, in the planning, execution, and compliance and evaluation process. And last but not least is the whole issue of the transformation in agriculture and food system to foster transition from exclusive blue and green production practices to focus on a more management-intensive, risk-sensitive, climate-smart, and sustainable practice for improvement in productivity, resilience, value addition, and market and trade. The reason I took time off is because this is an important framework under which we're going to be working and moving forward. And most of what I'll be speaking from can be linked to this policy framework. Now, we are working very closely with women. And one of the areas that we're looking at is the issue of microfinance. And I would like to say something about the microfinance. We do have facilities in Dominica that provide financial support to agribusinesses and so on. But the concept of microfinance as it relates to building resilience, as it relates to the adoption of best practice, adaptation for possibilities in terms of reduction of vulnerabilities, is not clearly defined. And as such, what we have done is to get a very clear understanding of the microfinance environment through a situation analysis that was able for small and medium-sized business, but looking very closely at the issue of building resilience among the vulnerable groups. And that our focus in that case was women. Another area that we are working very closely on is the issue of the value chain development. And in so doing, what we are doing is understanding the market that we operate in, looking at certain priority value chains, and again, in the context of value chains that have shown some level of resilience, as well as value chains that we need to advance in terms of building resilience and reducing their vulnerabilities, understanding the relationship among the chain actors, along the value chain and creating the linkages between the producers and the market. So these are some of the things that some of the approaches we took in terms of the value chain development. Along the lines of climate smart agriculture, we have been looking at employing a gender approach, not just looking at the technical aspect in terms of climate events and technologies, but looking at how gender inclusion in the process and looking at the business development aspect in terms of resilience. And under the climate smart agriculture, our focus will be on building capacity, utilizing various methodologies and developing modules that can be used to train our beneficiaries. Now, it is important I just highlight some of the critical products that we have achieved thus far moving forward. And one of the outcome or one of the products that I can indicate that is available now is a culturally appropriate and gender responsive microfinance strategy or mechanism for small and medium-sized agricultural enterprises. And we do have a implementation plan to implement a pilot gender responsive microfinance scheme for the small businesses. We also have developed the training modules that can support our beneficiaries in terms of managing and accessing microfinance. We do have, we are in the process of developing an e-commerce platform that will link our producers to market, as well as to develop their products that to meet some of these market requirements, as well as looking at the whole issue of value addition as one component in building resilience in the products that they're dealing with. So this is some of the critical things that are ongoing, and we are hoping that most of what we are doing is towards livelihood resilience, towards sustainable livelihood activities, and again to contribute to the sustainable development of some of the rural territories with a lot of emphasis on our women. And to close, I just want to make mention of some of the critical projects that assisted us in doing some of this work. We have been working with the UNDP on the project titled Strengthening Disaster Management Capacity of Women in the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and Dominica. And we were responsible for implementing Output 2 that deals with livelihood resilience, strengthening hazard-prone communities using the gender-responsive disaster risk reduction and sustainable livelihood approaches. And there are other activities that we are involved in, for instance, under the Partnership Initiative on Sustainable Land Management that can contribute to natural resource management, as well as our own internal projects, because we do have a project that we are involved in right now that we're actually measuring vulnerabilities in the rural communities in terms of our food security vulnerabilities, in terms of climate change. So there are a number of things that we are doing that will be contributing in terms of building resilience, strengthening our livelihood, and reducing some of the vulnerabilities to climate change.